I'm going to be honest with you. When I first had the idea to create this show, my mind was eager and excited, jumping way into the future of the best case scenario where the number of listeners skyrocketed to astronomical proportions. I started taking deals from distilleries to tell their stories in my own signature style. My head was completely in the clouds. And, while I'll hold on to the hope that it could still happen, this is not going to be anywhere near that kind of episode. In fact, I'm going to tell you a story behind a bottle that I only found by random chance, one that I can only find a handful of pictures of online, and that I had to email the distillery to make sure it's still being produced. It's a little short and a bit morbid, but this story is simply too amazing to pass up. A gritty tale in the Wild West, where gunfights and bandits are commonplace, exemplifying the outlaw spirit. Behind every bottle is hundreds of stories, every step starting from growing grain until it reaches your glass. This spirit is collecting experiences and stories that it would love to tell you. It's my goal to sift through these stories, find the most meaningful, and bring them forward to your attention. This isn't another whiskey review channel or show. This is pure storytelling. I won't analyze every detailed tasting note of the spirit in the bottle. Instead, I'll dive into the details of the spirit behind the bottle. And this is the spirit of John Shaw. For this story, we're traveling back to dusty Arizona in 1905. Roosevelt had just started his first full term as U.S. president. Dr. Seuss celebrated his first birthday, and despite being roughly 25 years after the events that had inspired the movie Tombstone, parts of Arizona and life within are virtually unchanged. Our story takes us to the small city of Winslow, which you may have heard of in an Eagles song, Take It Easy. It became a common resting place for celebrities traveling west to Hollywood. But right now, it's mostly just a stop for the trains. For our story, it's currently April 7th, just before midnight. Outside the Wigwam Saloon, a cool breeze is in the air, and two men in their early to mid-20s are waiting near the door, dressed in their finest clothes. After their brief wait outside, the pair have built up their confidence, or at least their composure, and enter the saloon. Walking past the poker table where a group of 7 are currently playing, they instead go directly up to the bar. They both order a shot of rot gut, which was a common type of whiskey at the time. The men then reach into their pockets. Feeling the cold steel against their fingers, they pull out their revolvers and turn to face the poker table. Now holding the players at gunpoint, they take somewhere between $200 and $600 in silver coins. At today's value, they now had somewhere between $6,000 and $20,000 in stolen silver, and they were able to walk right out the front door without ever firing a single shot. These two bandits are William Evans, no connection to Evan Williams despite this being a whiskey show, and John Shaw. Little is known about their lives before this night, but their robbery and the events of the following days would become somewhat of a Western legend. For now, we lose track of our antagonists as they flee from the saloon, stolen silver in hand, and switch over to the owner of the Wigwam Saloon, and Deputy Sheriff Pete Pemberton, who is quickly informed of the robbery and rushed to investigate the scene. After conducting his search for evidence, and likely checking to make sure his establishment and property were undamaged, all that remained of the bandits were 2 full glasses of whiskey that were found abandoned at the bar. He then sent word of the incident to our story's other protagonist, Sheriff Chet Hawk, who was currently one town over to the east in Holbrook. That night, while walking out of the station, Pemberton and a city marshal would stumble upon the trail of the outlaws. Silver coins occasionally spilled from the arms of the robbers led Pemberton and the marshal up to and alongside the train tracks, suggesting that the pair had jumped aboard a moving train heading west. So Pemberton and the marshal followed the tracks to the next town over, Flagstaff. The next morning, April 8th, Sheriff Huck boarded a train for Flagstaff to meet up with his deputy. However, when he arrived, no trace of the outlaws could be found in town. So they decided to travel back to Winslow, possibly to return to the crime scene and search for any clues about the bandits. But on this return journey, the two lawmen fortunately heard a rumor about a pair of men hiding in the bushes near a bend in the track close to Canyon Diablo. This is the part where I had started to question the legitimacy of this story. Canyon Diablo is actually a real place, but by 1905, it was already on the verge of being a ghost town. The Arizona publication, Tombstone Epitaph, which is the oldest continuously published newspaper in Arizona, and specifically focuses on the history of the Wild West in Arizona, wrote that Canyon Diablo is, and I quote, the toughest hellhole in the West. And as if we needed further confirmation of how rough and gritty this ghost town was, the main road is of course called Hell Street. At one point in time, this main road was home to 14 saloons, 10 gambling houses, and 4 brothels. The first lawman that the town ever had pinned his star badge to his chest for the first time at 3 p.m. and was buried by 8 p.m. the same day. Back with our heroes, they had just heard this rumor, so they determined that it would be best to stop the train a few miles away from Canyon Diablo and walk to town. This way they could keep a lower profile. By the time they reached their destination, sunset was falling upon the town. The two lawmen first visited a small store owned by Fred Voles, who informed them that 2 well-dressed men, like they had described, had been loitering outside the trading post for a suspicious amount of time earlier in the day. And, right on cue, our bandits William Evans and John Shaw walk around the corner, and are unknowingly spotted by Pemberton and Hulk. The 2 lawmen pursued them, and, on Hill Street, they were within 2 or 3 yards. Here the sheriff yelled out for them, commanding them to submit to a search. Evans and Shaw spun around, face to face with the lawmen, and one of them cried out, "No one searches us." Here the 4 characters stood. The brief moment must have felt like an eternity, waiting to see who would make the next move, knowing that when they do, bullets will fly. All at once the men grabbed at their revolvers. All 4 began to shoot at their opposing force, firing at point blank but in a terrified and rushed state that did not favor accuracy. In this time period, although revolvers could hold 6 bullets, most only carried 5, with the empty slot allowing for the firing pin to rest in a state that would prevent any accidental misfires. Pemberton was not like most men. In the quick flash of gunpowder, 21 shots were fired. Shaw missed all 5 of his shots. Hulk, having the bravery to close the distance even further, walked within 4 feet of the bandits and aimed true with one of his bullets, striking Shaw in the head. Pemberton had shot Evans in the leg, who in turn was aiming his last round at the much closer Hulk, before Evans was struck in the shoulder by Pemberton's 6th and final round, causing the bandits' 5th to only graze the sheriff. In these 3 seconds, John Shaw was now dead, Evans wounded, Sheriff Huck slightly wounded from the graze, and Deputy Pemberton was left unharmed. Shaw was placed into a pine wood coffin and buried in a shallow grave, which was all that the hard, rocky soil would allow for. Evans was escorted to a hospital in Winslow, and after making a recovery, would spend the next 9 years in prison. $271 worth of silver coins were found in their possession. The night after the shooting in Canyon Diablo, the story was naturally being told at the Wigwam Saloon. A group of cowboys happened to be the audience for this story, and when they heard about how the bandits never got to drink the whiskey they had ordered, they decided that John Shaw deserved his last drink. So they boarded the train, heading for the canyon. The 15 to 20 men would continue to drink at the train station when they arrived the following morning, before visiting the small shop to try and convince Fred Voles to allow them to borrow a shovel. And while Voles did not agree with what the men intended to do, he eventually gave in, providing not only the shovels, but a camera as well, possibly to create proof that he helped to stop the bandits and claim any reward money. So the men got to work, digging up the fresh grave and opening the pine wood coffin, revealing the body of the outlaw, who appeared to be smiling. This sight frightened some of the men, but soon they had him propped up against a fence that belonged to one of the other nearby graves. The men gave him a plentiful gulp of whiskey, took a few photos with the body, said a few prayers, then returned him to his shallow grave, holding the half-empty bottle of whiskey in his arms. And that's where we'll lay this story to rest. If you're inclined, you can visit Canyon Diablo, and just east in Flagstaff lies Canyon Diablo Distilling, who has a whiskey named after John Shaw to honor the story and the history of that area. If you enjoyed these stories and want to make sure you know when the next episode is released, join my mailing list. I'll have it linked in the show description. Now I think I'm going to enjoy a glass with a smile on my face. I hope you'll join me for more stories in the future, but for now, I'm Ryan Heinzen, and this has been the Spirit of John Shaw. In the next episode of The Spirit of, we're going into the story of the king of the bootleggers during Prohibition, a man who gained so much wealth and influence that he was the inspiration for The Great Gatsby. There's speakeasies, mobsters, bribes, and of course, whiskey. I'll see you there.